Hello, I'd like to welcome everyone to the webinar today. I'm Jeremy Clute. I head up the products group for Enlight Software, part of Carrier Corporation. And I'm joined today by Mike Wilson, our Director of Marketing. We're thrilled to be able to talk with all of you today about a topic that is probably the most pressing topic going on in the data center industry at present, and that is sustainability. And what we want to do is we've done a lot of research and development in this area over the last, call it 18 months, is talk with you all today about a topic we're going to call accelerating sustainability through integrated data center management. So with that, I'll hand it over to Mike to cover the agenda and a few slides, and we'll go back and forth during this webinar on various topics. So thanks again for joining us, and here we go.
Thank you, Jeremy. In today's webinar, the key topics will be conversation baselines, where I'll cover a data center's purpose, where data centers can be found. Some of these places can be surprising. Why data center sustainability has become such a hot topic recently. Specific governments and organizations becoming involved in data center sustainability legislation and standards. I'll then turn the conversation over to Jeremy, who will discuss data center sustainability rules and standards. We'll then review specific initial actions data center operators can take. And finally, we'll provide some detail on the systems and information involved in delivering sustainable data centers. In the data center industry, we typically say the purpose of a data center is to run workloads. But essentially, data centers process answers to questions and requests. Everything from complex calculations such as what will next year's projected revenue be given factors X, Y, and Z, to simple requests such as show me funny cat videos. We all use data centers every day. Data centers enable modern life. Data centers aren't just large standalone complexes. They're often very small and can be found in most vertical markets. They're just called different things: edge computing, data center in a rack, intermediate distribution frames or IDFs, etc. We'll skip over the high tech. I think we all know that Google and IBM have data centers, and so does the federal government. But less obvious examples of where data centers reside are retail organizations that use data centers to run their checkout systems, or POS systems, conduct price checks, facilitate product receiving. Every Target, every Home Depot, every Dollar Tree in the world has a mini data center in it. Banking. Bank tellers are highly dependent on data centers, as are ATM transactions. Every banking location has a mini data center in it. Telecom. Not just the main office, but every cellular tower in the world has a mini data center in it, right at the bottom. Healthcare. These are typically data closets on each floor, often near the nursing station, monitoring patient vitals and helping doctors with diagnostics. Higher ed. From research support to auditorium AV, every university has one or more data centers. Data centers use a lot of resources, and regulators have begun to take notice. Some quick stats on the amount of resources a typical data center uses. As much as a small US town, 3% of global power and rising. The third bullet down is the one that hits home for me. It really puts my data consumption in perspective. 0.2 grams, or a fifth of gram, of carbon dioxide per Google search. These stats predate the recent proliferation of publicly available AI resources, such as ChatGPT, Midjourney, Bard, etc., which only drives up the demand for computing resources. One additional quick fact: the largest publicly disclosed data center in the world is in Langfang, China. It's 6.3 million square feet in size. That's nearly the size of the US Pentagon, or 110 American football fields, or 80 soccer pitches. The result of regulators taking notice of data center energy consumption is sustainability compliance reporting. It is on the rise and accelerating. The European Union Energy Efficiency Directive, or EU EED for short, Jeremy will actually dive into this a little deeper, but rules ratified this year require annual reporting of data center sustainability measures. This year's metrics must be reported next year. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission's 2023 proposal is taking a different approach. The SEC doesn't have any power to tell businesses to run their data centers efficiently. but they do have authority to mandate that businesses report climate-related carbon sourcing risks that would have material impact on their business operations. Data centers are always material. They are critical to business operations, and, as discussed in the previous slide, they consume a lot of carbon. California Title 24 has standards about computer room efficiencies, PUE monitoring, water usage efficiency. The tough thing about Title 24 is finding specific, detailed information. In researching the various prescriptive requirements by region, California's was the toughest to quantify. Singapore and the Australian neighbors standards take a more carrot model. They provide benefits to businesses that comply with recommended standards. The American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Engineers, or ASHRAE, until recently concerned itself with general commercial facilities and educational facilities. In February, ASHRAE Standard 90.4 was published. This standard applies to data centers with conditioned floor area of greater than 20 watts per square foot and IT equipment loads greater than 10 kilowatts. Given that a single populated data center rack, when running at full capacity, can consume upwards of 20 kilowatts, the standard is broadly applicable. Standard 90.4 contains specific requirements for HVAC mechanical and electrical systems installed in new data centers. A phrase popularized in the 1930s, Tanstaffel, there ain't no such thing as a free lunch, is an adage that communicates the idea that it is impossible to get something for nothing. This is definitely applicable to the data centers. For all the wonderful answers and cat videos we receive from data centers, there is a cost. Power and clean water go in, waste heat and dirty water come out, resulting in legislative attention.
Thanks, Mike. It's interesting to note that when you're talking about the measures, the calculations, metrics, even the very definitions of data centers, it varies greatly. It varies greatly according to which geographic region you're in, which jurisdiction a data center or a series of data centers falls into, how that's governed or what the governing bodies dictate. And within that, you've got various groups that will set various metrics that need to be reported, right? So in other words, if you're looking at, for instance, what the European Commission is doing with the Energy Efficiency Directive, they've got a very well-defined set of metrics that must be reported, indicating when those reports need to be submitted for data centers of a certain size. And then you can look across, as I mentioned, different geographies. So you may have something different in California, for example, something different in Singapore. So all of this says that since everything varies by region, there's a lot of complexity in all of it, you have to basically have a lot of flexibility built into your system or tools that do the data collection. In other words, you can collect raw data, you can collect raw data points off of infrastructure, but how those metrics, how those data points are combined and then computed to provide adequate reporting for whoever the jurisdiction is or whoever the governing body is quite important. So built-in flexibility is really a key when you're looking at all of this. It's also very clear that the targets for sustainability in data centers and abroad are moving targets. If you look at what's going on with the European Commission's Energy Efficiency Directive, for instance, in May of 2024, companies and data centers will need to begin reporting on their metrics for 2023. Now, what happens once that first body of work is submitted by all reporting companies, by all reporting data centers? You have to imagine that there will be a lot of review of that data. I would expect that there will be companies that have a hard time collecting some of the metrics that are being requested. Will everyone have one standard approach, for instance, to collecting water usage information? Will everyone have one standard approach to understanding their renewable energy usage? While there are standards written for the Energy Efficiency Directive to say this is what a person reporting this data must provide, this is how it must be defined, that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone will have at their disposal the exact same measurement capabilities, right? How are you measuring water usage, for instance? Are you getting information that you use and manually input from your utilities, or are you metering the water and so on at the data center level? So there are a lot of questions around how that goes. And again, it all adds up to the need for built-in flexibility in the systems and tools you're leveraging to collect the data and compute the metrics. Flexibility will be key. One of the greatest things about the processes, any process, is that it's made to be improved, right? So there will be tweaks to the processes along the way, and you need to have a system that can be tweaked along with you as you go on this journey toward sustainability.
So how can you start to prepare for the stricter reporting mandates around the corner? Well, create a strategy to improve sustainable practices in reporting, enact policies and processes that drive efficiency and sustainable practices, establish data collection standards and reporting plans. This part needs to happen pretty quickly. And define a flexible reporting framework that will ensure timely information for required sustainability compliance reporting that is flexible enough to change as the standards change. This is particularly important, as Jeremy discussed. Standards are evolving quickly, and changes to those standards is frequent. Locating documentation on compliance reporting requirements that impact data centers is not as straightforward as one would expect. In researching the European regional rules, I found an outstanding resource for detailed information about EU EED compliance requirements, presentations, good practices, and general information, all organized by country. If you operate a data center in Europe, it is likely subject to mandatory reporting of this year's sustainability measures next year. Bookmark ca-eed.eu for some very helpful guidelines.
You know, another great strategy that we can employ as data center operators is aligning our cooling with workload demand. At its core essence, this is, you know, one of the key tenets of integrated data center management. The building automation systems for, you know, years have been controlling the environment, controlling the infrastructure, and so on. But one of the key things that has often eluded the building automation system is an awareness of the workloads. In other words, how much compute is happening in a certain location at a certain time. And by integrating the building automation system with any data center infrastructure management solution, you're able to much better create an awareness of really each system upon each other. So in other words, where I have workloads running at certain hours of the day, I need to make sure that I am adequately cooling that environment, or even being able to do things like pre-cooling in advance of a known heavy workload, right? So it's important to make sure that those things are aligned. You can, through an integrated approach, relatively easily increase your overall data center efficiency by matching the workloads to the free cooling or renewable energy sources that you may have available to you in certain locations at certain times. I would also say you can do things like utilizing autonomous and remote management, especially in and around edge locations where you may not have on-site staff. So by being able to leverage a tool that gives you a view from afar, from, you know, remotely, as to the situation at a remote or edge location, you can make yourself much more efficient. And then, of course, in cases where you have things like high density environments, which are ever increasing, we've seen enormous growth through various surveys of data center environments, data center customers, data center operators, that high density is clearly a huge concern for people now. Not just where do you source power and so on, but at this point, you know, how can we leverage the high density to give us better energy efficient cooling options? And certainly you can, right? The more compute you have located in a place, the better, more targeted approach you can find to cooling that environment and so on. So there are several pieces or several strategies that you can really take toward properly and optimally aligning cooling with workloads with your workload demand. Another clear strategy is, of course, targeting and trying to reduce or eliminate carbon-intensive infrastructure. Through the industry for the last several years, you've seen people like Microsoft making really big strides toward this goal. And in the case of Microsoft, of course, they plan to stop using diesel generators by 2030. They did a lot of really interesting and promising tests with hydrogen fuel cells and so on. So, another thing is when you're looking at new builds, of course, and we're hearing this a lot from engineering and design firms, is that looking to design in alternative energy sources anywhere that they possibly can. So the latest and greatest buildings, almost to a number, are factoring in renewable energy anywhere they possibly can. And I think that's certainly over the long haul going to be something that really takes us much closer to our sustainability targets overall. Switching from strategy to process, one of the things I love to talk about is implementing workflow management in an organization for several reasons. As I mentioned earlier about process, one of the great things is processes are made to be improved, right? So when we improve as an organization, we get more efficient, we're more optimized, and really all of that can help lead to a more sustainable organization, a more sustainable operation. So a few things I like to talk about when it comes to this are doing things like developing organizational processes for sustainability certifications and so on. This gets everyone involved. It gets everyone sort of in the game, if you will, towards sustainability goals, and people become more aware, right? So develop some kind of organizational processes around that. You also can look at things like establishing procurement guidelines to ensure the purchase of efficient equipment. This is being driven today through many, many organizations. We're being told by all customers that while cost savings at one time drove efficiency plays within their organization, they're seeing sustainability being driven by the brand, by their corporate offices as the key driver these days. We've talked about tweaking, right? So having a flexible system that allows you to tweak your metrics or how you're measuring things and tweak the processes for gathering data. This is certainly still very important here when you look at being able to identify points in things like your equipment deployment process for inserting efficiency gains. So measuring, improving, measuring, improving over and over again really will drive toward a more sustainable operation. And then ultimately, of course, you can define processes around optimizing your metrics. So this is what we're talking about. You measure, you improve, you report. Then we move into the exciting part, the metrics themselves. And a lot of people that I talk to say, we're just not sure where we should begin. We know that we expect that we're going to have to report metrics. We know that there's going to be legislation. In some cases, we may be fined if we don't report, but we're not exactly sure what we need to be gathering. And so to those people, I always say, well, let's start at some of the basics, right? PUE we've been talking about for well over a decade at this point in the industry, and most people have some mechanism for recording PUE. So look at things like that. You also have the usage effectiveness for carbon as well as for water. All of these early on defined have relatively common standards across geographies and are relatively simple to get at. I would say that, water, again, we mentioned that earlier, can be tricky in the sense that not everybody is recording water usage the same way, or I would say even their overall water, whether they're metering or from the utility standpoint and so on, how they're getting that data. But it is something that is pretty universally being mentioned as something that should be reported on. And so the time is really now to start thinking about gathering some of these basics. Also, total carbon dioxide is listed here as well. But these are just a few of the basics. And you may have others that you are fond of looking at or discussing already. Moving on from the basics, then, as you move kind of up the stack in level of complexity, what sort of metrics are you recording? Are you going just by a certain set of standards that are being defined by one body, or are you looking at things like, Green Grid is defining some, the National Renewable Energy Labs is defining some, ASHRAE is defining some, and you want to put all those together. And once you move sort of into that more complex environment, you can get into tools like real-time dashboarding, where you have the ability to do things like setting thresholds and visual indicator alarms for which sort of metrics are falling inside or outside of the defined parameters, right? Looking at things like cooling efficiency metrics and server utilization metrics. And as you look at, one of the things that I keep mentioning in this discussion is the Energy Efficiency Directive. Certainly all of those begin to play a factor in that. They've got great metrics around server utilization and server energy efficiency that are being defined. And those standards are well defined, well documented, but in order to adhere to those standards, you have to be able to collect the data, compute the data, and then present it in such a way that it's benchmarkable. And then, once you have the benchmarks, you can improve from there. But again, you moving into this sort of real-time view of the data is highly important, and I think will be even more so year over year as we continue to see more definition and more standardization around what's being done with this. Digging a little bit further in on water usage effectiveness, one of the metrics I keep mentioning today is at a base level. If you just look at the formula, what is it really representing? So it's water in liters over the kilowatt hours for the operation of the IT equipment. And so you need to be able to configure a metric that puts together those numbers based on the raw data that you've collected. And then ultimately, that's going to feed into the reporting. And of course, once you've got the metrics configured and viewable, you're going to want to be able to ensure your compliance, right, with whatever governing body you're reporting to. And so from there, you would want to be able to take that data and put it into a nice formatted compliance report. And that's kind of an example here that we're giving you. You can see this again targeted at the Energy Efficiency Directive. Again, this is something that data centers will have to report on beginning in May of next year, data centers of a certain size. And you can just see a couple of examples here around renewable energy factor and carbon usage effectiveness and what this might look like when you submit that to the governing body.
Given the audience for this webinar, you're probably all familiar with the operation and value of HVAC and BAS systems sharing information. This is a very extensible concept. As discussed earlier, data centers produce a lot of heat waste. The more information the building automation system has about what is happening inside the data center, the more efficiently it can address that heat and save valuable IT equipment from overheating. An analogous model is weather forecasting in the building automation and controls world. If you know that there's going to be a weather event in a few hours, don't wait. You can algorithmically pre-cool or preheat the space. This should also be the practice in data centers. If there's a known upcoming workload request, don't wait until the pendulum sensor in front of the server detects that the data center is too hot or too cold. As Jeremy covered earlier, align cooling with workload demand. Better, align cooling with predicted and known future workload demands. Emergency cooling a space is less efficient, strains the mechanical systems, and puts your very expensive servers at risk. Integrating the building automation system to the data center information system is the foundation of IDCM, Integrated Data Center Management. Operational costs can be improved, data center uptime can be enhanced, and you have comprehensive system information and operational insight to make sustainability improvements. In summary, integrated data center management systems are pivotal in advancing the sustainability of data centers by centralizing the monitoring, analysis, and management of all critical infrastructure components. Through real-time data aggregation and analytics, IDCM systems empower data center operators with actionable insights into energy consumption, cooling efficiency, and overall operational health, enabling the optimization of resource utilization and the reduction of carbon footprint. This granular visibility facilitates informed decision-making for energy-saving measures, such as the adoption of more efficient cooling systems or the transition to renewable energy sources. Moreover, IDCM's comprehensive data collection and reporting capabilities are instrumental in adhering to evolving sustainability regulations. By automating the tracking of energy metrics and sustainability KPIs, these platforms ensure that data centers can readily comply with legislative mandates, effectively report on sustainability efforts, and demonstrate progress towards environmental objectives, thus contributing to the industry's broader move towards a greener, more sustainable future. If you're looking for additional information on the topics covered today, I'd encourage you to visit nlight.com and go to our Resources White Papers page, where you'll find white papers and executive briefs regionalized and in multiple languages. We have also published several articles on this topic and adjacent topics on automatedbuildings.com. Just search for the key term data center and they'll pop up. In the current issue of the Journal of Building Automation, available for free on bacnetinternational.org, we have an article entitled Compliance as a Catalyst, Regulatory-Driven Sustainability in Data Centers. Just go to bacnetinternational.org and select Journals. If you'd like to dive a little deeper on the topic of IDCM, you should download our ebook, which explains the importance of IDCM, describes the key components of the architecture, and guides you in a step-by-step formula for IDCM implementation success. Chapters in the book include what is IDCM and why do you need it, exploring IDCM building blocks, defining IDCM use cases, and getting the most from your IDCM systems. If you would like to stay up to date on the topic of data center sustainability, we recommend joining the Sustainability in Data Centers LinkedIn group. On LinkedIn, search Sustainability in Data Centers, then click the Groups button. If you're planning on attending the AHR Expo in Chicago in January, nLight Software will be conducting 2 education sessions. On Monday, January 22nd, from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m., we'll do a deep dive on compliance as a catalyst, regulatory-driven sustainability in data centers. Also on Monday, from 2 p.m. to 3 p.m., I'll be running a panel discussion on integrated data center management with some industry experts. If you're looking for a solution to this pressing issue now, please visit nlight.com, Solutions, Data Center Sustainability Compliance Reporting, which will acquaint you with nLight Software's Sustainability Measures Dashboard and Compliance Reporting Framework, or select See nLight in Action, the button at the top of the screen, to schedule a demo. Thank you for your time and attention today. When you're ready to take your data center to the next level of sustainability, we are ready to help. Thank you.